Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Erich Kurschat. I am the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, and I wanted to welcome you to today's Harmony Insights lunch date. Harmony Insights is a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment to help them engage employees and workforces, including now while they're at home. A lot of them, you can do a lot of things virtually with DISC. I'm also the founder of HR Hot Seat, which is an inclusive mastermind community of over 2,500 HR professionals and those who serve HR professionals around the country in 10 different licensed chapters. This is a Harmony Insights lunch date. I decided a couple of weeks ago that I wanted to remain inspired by people who inspire me. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, and I felt like I wanted to control what I was taking in and be influenced by people again who I find influencing. And Paul LaLonde, my guest today, has made that short list. Paul LaLonde, welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date.
Uh, Thank you, Eric. I'm very appreciative that you asked me to be here and humbled that you are inspired by me. It's a very short list of folks. So,
Paul, I am thrilled to have this conversation. You and I met initially at SHRM 2018, a local or a national, we'll say, HR conference that was held here in Chicago, and have remained good friends ever since. Do you want to begin by, or I'll ask you, I suppose, to begin by um, the way that we typically begin Harmony Insights on lunch dates, which is, if you're willing to share, giving us some sense of how you have personally been impacted by the coronavirus. A lot of us are working from home when we don't typically do so. We've had a hard time getting things from the grocery store. There are all kinds of ways that we've been impacted. How have you personally been impacted?
uh, personally, it was we had actually just moved uh, from our current residence into where we're at now, literally 2 weeks before all this started really going awry. So I always kind of joke, make a little bit of levity that I'm really glad that we like our house because I'm spending a lot of time here.
Right.
And I told myself, yeah, I got a lot of time to unpack and get the house situated, and I haven't looked at a single box, and it's
No,
been about 5 weeks. So
still sitting in the basement,
yeah,
huh?
I think the biggest thing is just wrapping my mind around how large this event is.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a lot of reading on the Spanish flu of 1918, 1919, and just seeing the parallels have really, I think, calmed me a little bit more that uh, this isn't new. Honestly, we humanity has been through this before 100 years ago.
Mhm,
Obviously, very few people alive today have been through it, but
mhm,
just reading the historical context, I think, has really put my mind at more ease that it's unprecedented given our current, economic connectivity,
mhm,
given our current advancements in the world.
mhm.
But this has happened before, and
Yeah.
people have made it through. Everyone says we'll never return to normal. What's a new normal? I'm like, no one had heard of the Spanish flu until a couple of weeks ago. Normal will come back,
Yeah.
and just it's not to downplay anything or not to have fear about it, but I think it's just to put things in perspective a little bit.
Yeah.
When you're seeing pictures, black and white pictures of 1918 San Francisco with people wearing masks, it kind of goes, oh, wow, okay.
Mm. You've already mentioned one of our buzzwords for today, perspective. And that's a word we're going to continue to come back to. I love that word myself. And we could spend our entire conversation just talking about perspective, but we'll come back to that. This conversation is titled Stoicism in a COVID World. And as you know, Paul, and maybe some of our attendees know as well, the impetus for this conversation was a social media post that you put up, and that I then was inspired by and decided to share myself. So hopefully this works. I'm going to try to share that social media post. Hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. Not if you can. Can you see it? Okay, good. So this was the post. You can see I gave Paul credit up top, and it talks about what I can control and what I can't control. at this point. You see some pretty fundamental things on there, in terms of what you can control, your positive attitude, turning off the news, etc., what you can control, how others react, the amount of toilet paper at the store, and the list goes on and on. You'll also see that there were 400, I received at least 417 reactions to it, 40 comments, and over 12,000 views as of this morning. And whenever something like that happens, it lets me know that we've kind of struck a nerve with people, that they're reading something about this, and there's something about it that resonates with them that I want to explore further. And I number one, want to thank you for sharing it, because had you not shared it, we would not have been having this conversation. And had you not shared it, over 12,000 people wouldn't have viewed it in the meantime. So that contribution alone is something that I wanted to thank you for. Let's get into this a little bit. So, as we're talking about what we can control and what we can't, especially now, and what Stoicism, Stoic philosophy, may have to say about all of this, what qualifies you, Paul LaLonde, as somebody who has something to contribute to this particular conversation? Tell us about your fascination with Stoicism, but then also the work that you do now and how it plays into this conversation.
Yeah, I think, well, I always start with a story about probably 10 years ago. I was just kind of in a rut, not really knowing where life was taking me, a little bit of a situation. And I was just walking through Barnes and Noble, which I miss doing, but that I just randomly caught in the bargain section this little book that was called The Art of Living. And it was translations of ancient philosopher called Epictetus. And I didn't know anything about any of this. I was just like, I didn't even know how to pronounce Epictetus at the time, but it was modern translations and really was the art of happiness. So I took it and then read through it, and it was essentially all of his Stoic teachings. And the very, very first thing in the book was, and this was core in Epictetus's teaching, was know what you can control, know what you cannot control, and focus on what you can control. And there's a lot of, like, I think Eastern philosophy in that, sort of a Western philosophy. Like I think the Dalai Lama once said that if you're worrying and you're anxious about something, ask yourself this question: can you control it? If you can, then why worry? He also says, ask yourself, if you can't control it, again, why worry? And that's such a freeing concept in my mind. And it's almost impossible in some instances, because you literally know you can't control this and you should just let it go and let it be. But you can't. And it's just reaffirming that notion in my mind to me. So ever since that time, I've spent the last 10 years just continually reading about Stoicism, reading uh, people may be more familiar with Marcus Aurelius from Gladiator. He had wrote what was called the Meditations, and that was actually his own journal to himself. And when he died, one of his soldiers found it, and then it ended up getting taken out through all of the camp, and it's with us to today. So I've just kind of taken on all that and just trying to learn. To me, Stoicism is it's not, when it comes to philosophy, it's not two people debating how many angels can be on the pin of a needle. Practical, everyday wisdom. And I take that and try and live it in every day of what I'm doing, whether that's through my HR practice, whether it's through just being in relationships with people, or whether it's just being in a relationship with yourself and trying to get better and do the best you can for yourself.
I love that. There's so much of what you're talking about. So you were kind enough to introduce me to Epictetus in the Art of Living, and you see I have a number of pages tagged. We're not going to get to all of them today, but as Paul said, you open up at least this translation of the book, and the very first of several meditations, we'll say, is entitled "Know What You Can Control and What You Can't." And it says, among other things, trying to control or to change what we can't only results in torment. Remember, too, that if you think that you have free reign over things that are naturally beyond your control, or if you attempt to adopt the affairs of others as your own, your pursuits will be thwarted and you will become a frustrated, anxious, and fault finding person. Something that I'd prefer to avoid myself. Even reading this, I think, okay, that makes sense. Logically, I understand that makes sense. But Paul, it's more easily said than done, isn't it?
Absolutely. There's this Stoic concept called ataraxia, which to me, it's freedom from disturbance by outside things. So the ultimate goal is to, go through life understanding that. I liken it to sort of like nirvana, in
Hmm.
Buddhism. I've never met anybody who became a Buddha,
Hmm.
I've never
Hmm.
met anybody who's achieved that perfect atraxia. Uh, you get glimpses of it, and that's sort of the point, I guess, that if you reach the top of the mountain, where do you go from there? You
Hmm.
have these uh, sort of unreachable goals to hold you accountable, to keep you going on the right path.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I always like about Stoicism is you will fall. It's inevitable. Uh, but every time you fall, you can pick yourself back up,
Yeah.
and it teaches you that.
I like that. That I mean, even though we're talking about sort of ancient philosophy, I don't know if that's a technical term or not for what we're talking about, but we're talking about philosophy that has been around for quite some time. There is still present day applicability, and I want to get into that in a moment. But I also want to highlight the fact that yes, um, Epictetus lived and wrote quite a while ago, but we've seen these thoughts and these philosophies show up time and time again since. And I just took a look at my own bookshelf and I grabbed a few books that I think have been influenced by Stoic philosophy. We have How to Win Friends and Influence People. We have Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. We have Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And one of my favorites, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Mm.
And there is if there's a part in Epictetus, the book that you've already talked about, a quote on that says, in any events, however seemingly dire, there is nothing to prevent us from searching for its hidden opportunity. And so there's that idea of perspective that comes back. When I open Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, I see, we must never forget that we may also find meaning in life even when confronted with a hopeless situation, when facing a fate that cannot be changed. For what then matters is to bear witness to the uniquely human potential at its best, which is to transform a personal tragedy into a triumph. We get that same idea of perspective. And so I just love to see how the Stoic philosophy um, has stayed with us in so many different ways, and what's the word that I'm looking for? Taking on, just basically taking on new form and iteration. Have you seen that as well in other books that you have read?
Yeah, I have. I think, and I got distracted before I hopped on this. I was going to grab a bunch of books like you did to
I
show
got you
people.
covered.
Yeah,
We're good.
I absolutely. Um, I think they weren't. Well, Stoicism has sort of gotten its legs underneath it lately. There's a former, well, I'm trying to remember. I don't know what to call him, a media mogul kind of guy. His name is Ryan Holiday. I'm not sure if that name sounds familiar to a lot of people, but he actually used to he was like the youngest marketing executive at American Apparel, and he was there during its downfall, kind of a thing. But Stoicism has helped him through a lot of things, and he wrote 3 books that are kind of loosely called his Stoic trilogy. Stoicism is the base of it, but that's not really why he wrote them. The first one, and it was life changing for me, was called "The Obstacle Is the Way." The second one was "Ego is the Enemy," and then his third and final one was "Stillness is the Key." And throughout each of those books, he takes like real life individuals and what they were going through at a time, and then teaches a lot of Stoic lessons through that. One example was, oh gosh, Tecumseh Sherman, William Tecumseh Sherman, and how after the Civil War, he was like a national American hero. But he had no ego in that people were begging him to run for the presidency, and he didn't want to do it. He's like, no, I just know it'll destroy me. It's not what I want to do. So he didn't have an ego in that sense of wanting more, wanting that power. Unfortunately, his good general buddy with Ulysses S. Grant fell for it, and then sort of tarnished his legacy. So he takes real world situations and sort of teaches us common present day uh,
Mm.
theories and lessons.
And you said that was Ryan Holiday.
It was Ryan Holiday.
And Paul is going to share with us the resources that we're talking about. Paul is going to send to me, and I will then follow up with all attendees of this Harmony Insights lunch date via email with links to these resources, including the book I've already shown you. And something additional that I would like to do, I have found, I said I love Man's Search for Meaning. Turns out my wife and I have 2 copies of this book
Oh,
on our bookshelf. And so this one is used, but it's not written in, it's not dog-eared or any of that stuff. And I would love to give it away to somebody who's an attendee of this lunch date. So if you go online onto LinkedIn after this conversation and post something about this lunch date and tag me, Erich Kurschat, or Harmony Insights, I will choose my favorite response, my favorite post, and I'll get your address and mail you this copy of this book. It's phenomenal. It's life-changing in a number of ways if you really sit with it for a bit. One of my favorite things that Viktor Frankl talks about is, that our basically our greatest power between any catalyst and our response is to choose our response. It's that space to decide how you are going to respond to any event, and any catalyst. And even in a concentration camp, he talks about how he kept perspective and decided what his future would hold to the extent that he was able to, and more importantly, what perspective he was going to bring to his situation.
it was taking me, man. I was wrangling my brain, like, why do I know the name Viktor Frankl? And Ryan Holiday actually quotes him quite a bit in that
Yeah.
Stoic trilogy, and it goes back to your original thing of perception. That when Malcolm X was in jail, he used that time to transform himself. He could have uh, kept going down his destructive path that he was going on. And Ryan Holiday talks about how he transformed himself in jail in one of the worst environments you could be in to get out and become a life, a society changing type kind of figure.
Yeah.
So life is truly what we all make it. And if you can find peace in a concentration camp or in jail, then me being in my own house, I have very little excuse.
Right. Tim Ferriss also talks a lot about Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius. So if you're familiar with the 4-Hour Work Week, the 4-Hour Chef, I think, is another. He has a number of books along those lines. Tim Ferriss talks a lot about this stuff as well. You are an HR director. And I want you to talk just a bit about how your work in human resources has been influenced or informed by your sense of what you can control and influence and what you can't.
Yeah, I think HR is one of those professions that is not for the weak and the faint. It's really not. And I'm not trying to say it's a better profession than others, and we're just
Right,
tougher than others. I couldn't do a police officer's job.
right,
Not at all. Um, but you have to have that mental fortitude to keep going through the day. You're dealing with some tough stuff,
right.
potential sexual harassment stuff. You have to tell people that they're losing their jobs and they can't provide for their families anymore. You are working through COVID-19 related situations right now, and to a point, you have to figure out, where does the line stop? How much am I able to take on so the employee doesn't have to take that on, versus how much am I taking on where it's going to destroy me and get burned out and have to leave. So I think the stoic thing is centering for me personally, and I try and tie it together with everything I do. My blog is called the HR Philosopher,
Hmm.
and I chose that very, very intently and purposefully. That it's stoicism. Again, the concept of philosophy isn't just sitting around thinking about things and how the world works. That's a part of it, but once you figure that out, you have to go and implement it.
Hmm.
You know, when you are You can't, it's not enough to know that controlling your perceptions is important. You have to do it. And the true Stoic does it. So in my mind, when you apply that to whatever you're doing in that moment becomes an act of philosophy. So you are a philosopher. Everyone is a philosopher when you take it to that level. So human resources for me is an act of philosophy.
Mm.
You know, I'm living and acting what is up here, so to speak. It's not just up here and then it goes away and then it's like you become the Ubermensch with a Nietzsche or something. It's literally taking when Marcus Aurelius says in the meditations that I escaped anxiety today because I remembered it was inside of me. I can control it and discard it. Well, when I'm going into that meeting to talk about layoffs, I use that and figure out I'm discarding my anxiety at this moment because I have the important job to do.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I'm glad, I don't want to spend too much time here. There's so much that we could talk about, but I have all these notes and I'm probably not going to find the exact note that I wanted to share. But one of the things um, that I think I am challenged by when it comes to what we can control and what we can't is I love the thought that, yes, I have anxiety and I can control that. And I love the thought that nobody can, and it's in this book itself, nobody can make me feel a particular way. Only I can make myself feel a particular way. I love the idea of that, but it is also so challenging. You're going to have people that push back and say, well, due to chemical imbalances, maybe some of us can't control our anxiety. Or, if I'm walking down the street and I'm harassed by somebody, it's more easily said than done to say that, well, I can keep them at a distance and not let it bother me. um I don't know what question I'm driving at here, but I just want to acknowledge that a lot of what we're talking about, when you read it, so much of it really does make sense and so much it is worth striving for. But at the same time, I think there's a healthy level of perspective, certainly, but also journey to keep in mind,
Mhm.
perhaps um that it is a process, and that Viktor Frankl, even in Man's Search for Meaning, talks about the very few of us will ever reach, this sort of grand enlightenment where we're able to sit there and say, oh, I may be in a concentration camp, but I'm going to make the most of this. So maybe the question is, from your perspective, given the work that you do in HR and the reading that you've done, how reasonable is it to sense that we can determine those things that we have control over and that we don't, and live our lives focusing on only those things that we can control? Is this something that is truly attainable in your eyes? And if so, um, what does it take to move in that direction?
I would say absolutely by no means an expert
Mm,
on a lot of this stuff. I'm very much a self-taught person on a lot of this. But you are 100% right in that there are a lot of things that are outside of our control when we're trying to figure out what is within our control. You know, individuals with diagnosed mental health challenges with they truly do have a chemical imbalance, but at the same time it's recognizing that you can't control that.
mm,
What can you do, you know, to help sort of address it? You know, you can go to cognitive therapy sessions. You can read up on stoicism and try and learn a little bit about that. I think Stoicism isn't about immediacy. It's not a quick fix. It is
mm,
a lifelong journey, and it's how you dedicate yourself to that ideal, knowing you may never well attain that ideal. But were you better than you were the day before? If you can answer, yes, I'm trying to be better than I was the day before, honestly, every single day, then you're stoic and you're living that.
yeah.
Um, think of too like uh, Marcus Aurelius with he's the quintessential philosopher king with Plato. You know, reaching who do we want to be the leader among us? He would have been it. But even Marcus Aurelius, he persecuted Christians and threw them into the gladiatorial battles. You know, he himself had faced a pandemic that ravaged Rome. And the pandemic was actually called was named after him and his family. So the Antonine pandemic, he didn't do as much as he could have to help alleviate that situation. So even those that are best among us will fail. And if you
Mm,
just recognize that, get back up and realize that Stoicism is about the journey in how you're becoming a better person. At the end of the day, it's about the journey that matters, not necessarily that you were able to become this Buddha, so to
yeah.
speak.
That's a wonderful thought. I meant to do this earlier, but I think it bears mentioning that I think when you're struggling with what you can control and what you can't, remembering that there are others that are also struggling with that same question. We're not the only ones. That there's power in community, coming together to share thoughts and perspectives with other people. I'm going to launch this quick poll if you want to participate. That says, how easy is it for you to identify and let go of things that you can't control? Is it a piece of cake for you? Is it, are you a work in progress? Or my influence knows no limitations? Where do you fall on this? So we have some people that say it's a piece of cake, that they're able to distinguish between the two. And I think that's fantastic. And the majority, as I expected, the majority of people are saying I'm a work in progress. And I think we all are, to some extent. So thank you for participating in that. Paul, if you can believe it, our half hour is just about up, and I could talk all day about this. I hope it's been inspiring to the people who have joined us. If people want to engage with you further, if they want to check out, you've already mentioned your HR Philosopher blog. I wish we had additional time to talk about how you are identifying what you call street level influencers, which I think is just a fantastic term. If people haven't heard that, Paul is interviewing and shedding light on HR practitioners among us who are street level influencers and really making things happen, even if they're not necessarily, in the limelight and on panels and all of these things that draw attention to others in our community. If people want to find out more about these things, what you do, and maybe even learn a little bit more from you about your experience with Stoicism, how can they do that?
I'm very active on Twitter and LinkedIn. My Twitter handle's at hrpaul49. And then the LinkedIn account is just my name, Paul LaLonde. And then, of course, the blog.
Of course, the blog. And again, we'll put these resources in, links to these resources in a follow-up email. I will do that later this afternoon following our conversation. It is about 12:30. For those of you who need to leave, you're welcome to. You maybe have to get on with the rest of your day or finish your lunch, whatever you're doing at this point. If you want to stick around, Paul is going to stick around with us, and I would encourage you to ask any questions you have, share contributions, thoughts, and perspectives that you have on the conversation. In the meantime, if this has been valuable to you, if you would simply register for additional Harmony Insights lunch dates. We have some great conversations coming up this week and next. They're all free. They're all 30 minutes. They're all 12 o'clock Central Time, the beginning of my lunch hour, and all inspiring. I don't come at this with any particular agenda other than to engage somebody that I'm inspired by in conversation that I hope will connect us all more meaningfully. Paul, I really appreciate you being a part of this, and thank you for your perspective on what we control, what we can't, and how Stoicism informs those decisions.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you for asking me and having me.